quite a lot. It's a big new religious movement. Its ideas about ultimate reality would be influenced by Shintoism and Taoism, this sort of dialectical. The great ultimate is the yin and yang together, and we humans are meant to mirror the perfection of that. We become ill and depressed, and our lives stop functioning when we lose contact with that primordial energy of the universal chi. And the job of the Reiki master is to reopen that for the person, so that they once again revert to their primal perfection. We're all made, in the Judeo-Christian Islamic world, we're made in the image of God. That's their way of saying we're made in the image of the primordial perfection. And the Reiki teacher is simply recalibrating the connection, because we lose the connection. We forget that we're actually made in this divine image, and that's where all our troubles start. Anyway, it's a profound thing and worth studying. Okay, the one I got is in many ways interesting echo. It's Hindu Tantric philosophy, number 66, which is an Indian esoteric form of Hinduism, also very influential in other schools, Buddhism and so on. And I've given a lecture on this on the internet, which you can watch, about my views on Tantra, a sort of academic study of it. And I've gone into the etymology of Tantra, which is a very interesting word. Tan means, it comes from the same root as extension, tending, tension. And it means a force between 2 points. A ten is a force between 2 points. And all of reality is comprised of that tension, says Tantra, which is implicit in the microatomic level of the atomic structure. Atoms have a negative and a positive energy charge in their complex configurations, and that is the Tantra at the heart of physical reality as it is of mental reality. We have certain oscillations between, right and wrong, good and evil, love and hate. These are psychological polarities that we all inhabit this world. And the job of the one that wants to master that is to somehow find out where they're all coming from and go beyond them. And that's the tra bit. Tra is to transcend, to go to the transpersonal realm. And tra in Sanskrit is from the same root as transpersonal, transcendence. So accepting the dialectics of chaos, confusion and tension that we see in the world between all these opposing forces, the tantric is someone that tries to transcend and go to the source, the arche, beyond them. Anyway, I explain all that in my lecture. And I'm listening at the moment, as it happens, to a brilliant talking book on Audible, which I strongly recommend, by a tantric scholar who's also a practitioner, called the Recognition Sutras, which I found through serendipity, from the Kashmir Shaivite tantric tradition. And up in Kashmir, these Shaivite followers developed a very, very sophisticated form of Tantra. And one of their greatest texts was written down in the 10th century by a man called Ksema Raja. It's called the Recognition Sutras. And you can buy it as a book or as a talking book. I strongly recommend, if you want to know what Hindu Tantra is all about, this is like the best possible tantric survey that I've come across, because the translator gives a brilliant line-by-line commentary, like I've done with the Quran, on the text. And the Recognition Sutras, basically the position of Ksema Raja, is that we are all manifestations of Shiva. We are all forged in that divine consciousness, which is what Shiva stands for. Ksema Raja worshipped the goddess of awareness. Now, just think about that, the goddess of awareness. Because for him, Shiva and the goddess of awareness have co-created this entire universe as a field of play, not intended to cause pain, suffering, trouble. It's supposed to be a place of lila, divine play, in which male, female, all of us, black, white, all different religions, everyone on the the rainbow periodic table, we're supposed to be enjoying this. It's like a complicated glass bead game. But ultimately, we're all from the same divine stuff, Shiva, which is the divine consciousness with the goddess of awareness. And the Recognition Sutras is how to recognize that, how to remember that, how to reawaken and know that we are Shiva and Shakti. Anyway, it's a masterpiece, and it's a very metaphysical treatise. Now, I would say that what the Indian tantrics of Kashmir were doing and what the Reiki masters are doing from the Shinto tradition in Japan is very similar. What the Shintoists are doing and the Reiki masters is contacting the primordial unity, getting us back in touch with that so that our ills, our pains, our illnesses, our suffering, our diseases can dissolve back into primal purity. Well, that's exactly what Kshema Raja is saying in the Recognition Sutras. It's not, a specifically healing text, but it's about resituating one's splintered psyche back in the wholeness of everything, which then brings healing. And the word healing means to situate something in the wholeness of things. In Old English, healing meant the same as wholeness. So, I see a big link between these two traditions. It's fascinating stuff. And nowadays, many people have been exploring Tantra in the West, in America, in Europe, and everywhere. And just as they're exploring Reiki, what I think is so exciting about the time we're living in is that for the first time in history, we can have a periodic table, a map, a guide to all these traditions, and study them all freely. This was never available to people before. Now we have the internet; these things are there. And let's live up to them. Let's stick to the path of truth, because it's a serious business finding ultimate reality, finding that we're all made of Shiva. It brings certain duties and responsibilities, which is not to behave unethically, and to, as Christ said, love your enemies, because there's something of the divine in all of us. So anyway, that's my take on that. Any comments, questions, or?
In France, I'm following a guy who is practicing tantric yoga of Kashmir.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And he is focusing on the fact that the person is a mask, an illusion. And did you notice this aspect in the tantric philosophy?
Yeah, I think that's kind of implicit, that it's a temporary, brief bubble. Okay. It's like a dream-like manifestation. I mean, our physical forms will dissolve back into the matrix of the all. But I think the Tantric tradition, I believe, and I'm studying at the moment, is it's not so impatient to revert back. It's fine to have compassion on our physical forms, to enjoy each other's physical forms. This is why lovemaking and sexuality are sacred in the Tantric tradition, because enjoy each other's physical forms. They don't last forever, That's why we have them. And so it's not anti-life or anti-embodiment.
I
don't know what's
that's
the
not
name
what
of the French
I meant, because of course it's a kind of game, but ultimately we are not the person. We are consciousness that we can see the person, but we are not this person.
Sure.
I do not understand it well, of course, but
what's the name of this chap? The French tantric.
Éric Barret, and his master was Jean Klein, and it's a very profound teaching. I think I like it.
And he's speaking in French on
yes, and sometimes he speaks in English.
Okay, I'll look up his work and stuff, and thanks for the... I mean, as I say, there are thousands of people who've now gone to the East, studied these texts.
Yes.
They're available. I mean, one thing that's very interesting I learned from the Recognition Sutras, in Kashmir, which was an independent state up until modern times, these Kashmir tantrikas had written these sacred texts which survived amazingly. You know, really profound things based on their own spiritual research and the guru's lineage and so on. But some of them were destroyed. Sometimes they were regarded as heretical, or, you know, for reasons they weren't looked after. And what's a miracle is that when the British Raj was in India, we had governance of Kashmir, and some of our British scholars, Indologists, went out, found these texts, thought they were amazing, and had them published, sent them back to England. I think the University of Cambridge or something, published like 150 volumes of Kashmir Shaivite Tantric texts, which is how they survived. Because later a lot of them were destroyed, the original copies. So thank God we've got the originals, you know, were made facsimiles and photographs and stuff. So this is a really precious tradition. And I would love for the Sufis of Kashmir, I have Muslim friends in Kashmir, on the other side of the cultural divide, to sit down and discuss metaphysics with the Tantric Shaivite followers, and they'll find they're saying the same thing. You know, in the Sufi tradition, we're all manifestations of Allah, and ultimately we resolve into the beloved Allah. You know, so let's get the Muslims of Pakistan and the Hindus of Kashmir and India discussing this, because ultimately it's an illusion to stand up and say, I'm a Hindu and I hate all Muslims, or I'm a Muslim and I hate all Hindus. That's the illusion. Hatred is the illusion, which comes from not recognizing that the other is also divine. You know, so this has implications for peace thinking. Okay, talking of the divine, should we look at our tarot of gods, see which two gods are going to appear, and they might want to, you know, make an appearance in this conversation. It'll be, you choose the first one, and I'll go last. If it's one we've had recently, we'll do another card. Which one is this?
Dharma.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. Haven't had him for a long time, if ever. Celtic Druid god. Oh. Well, we've got two Druid gods today, both from Ireland. So that's interesting. So the first one is the Five of Water. And this is the deity, the Five of Water, known as Diarmid. And he's basically the god of love in the Druid tradition. And so, you know, we were talking earlier about embodiment and love. So in the Druid path, love is a sacred thing. But it can get you into trouble. And so one has to navigate, you know, love and sexuality carefully. Diarmid was called Diarmid of the Love Spot. He was known as he was a demigod, the son of Don, a god, and one of the Fianna, which is from the band of Finn McCool, who were like guardians of Tara, but human. And he became the lover of Granier. Now, the problem is that Granier was intended by Finn McCool, the leader of the Fianna, to be his wife. And what happened was that one freezing night, they were all asleep, the band of warriors, the Fianna, in the guarding Tara. And this loathly lady entered the Fianna lodge, where the warriors had all just gone to bed after a hunting expedition. And this woman, who was pretty ugly, she was drenched to the bone, her clothes were all wet, and her hair was all matted and ugly, and she went to all the young warriors and said, please, please give me a blanket. I want to share your bed. And they all told her, no, you're ugly, go away. You know. But old Diarmid, who had the bed nearest to the fireplace, took pity on her and gave her both his bed and his blanket. And she noticed that he had this strange spot on his forehead, which, like a love spot. You know, we say somebody has like a love spot. And she said that she had wandered the world alone for 7 years. And Diarmid said, you can stay all night, I'll look after you. He pledged his protection to her. And she rewarded him the next morning by turning into a beautiful young woman, as happens. And overjoyed, he then asked her to live with him. And she said she offered to agree on one condition. She would manifest his greatest wish, which was a house overlooking the sea. But on one condition, he must promise never to mention how ugly she'd looked on the night they met. So you can see where this story is going, right? There were 3 days. They spent 2 blissful 3 days together, like in a honeymoon. Okay. But basically, he forgot his pledge, and 3 times he said, you know, how ugly she'd been when they first met. I mean, he wasn't a druid, he wasn't wise enough, poor old Diarmid. And then, of course, everything disappeared. The house and the woman vanished into the mist. This is a really great druid teaching story. I think that bit of the story is like, don't go back on your word, or everything will vanish, right? Anyway, he set off to discover his lady. He used an enchanted ship, because he's a demigod, to find a path through the stormy sea. He eventually comes to another place in the other world where he follows clues across a meadow filled with brightly coloured horses and silver trees. And he then discovers little drops of blood which he puts on his handkerchief as a clue. He's following someone that must be bleeding. And a stranger appears and says the king's gravely ill daughter had just returned after 7 years. And Diarmid realises, that's my lady. So he goes to her side and discovers she's dying. And the 3 drops of blood that he'd collected were from her heart, which had been spilled each time she thought of Diarmid. The only cure for her, she said, was to bring the cup of healing water, which could only be gathered at the Plain of Wonder. And that was guarded by a jealous king and an entire army. And of course, Diarmid set off, vowed to bring back the cup. Right. And then, at an impassable river, Diarmid was helped. And this is when into the story appears this character called the Red Man of all knowledge. I mean, you know, you couldn't make this up, could you? So I think he has red hair, and he's the wisest person. He has all knowledge. Eyes glowing like coals. And he helps Diarmid across the river and guides him to where the healing cup can be found. Long and the short of it, the entire army come out to defeat Diarmid, 800 men, and in 3 hours of battling, not one of them is left standing. Diarmid defeats them all, being a demigod. And eventually the king gives in, gives him the cup of healing, which he then goes back, and he then gets back to heal the lady. But he's warned by the Red Man of all knowledge, who's very clever and sees the future, that the minute she's healed, his love for her will go. That's psychologically interesting. You know, it's the love was sort of wanting to help, to heal. The minute she's back on her feet, he won't be interested. He'll go off and look for someone else. That's what the Red Man said. So anyway, and that's what happened. Having cured his lover, he got bored and went back to the Fianna to join his friends. And then trouble broke out, because Granier, who was going to be marrying actually Finn's son, well, she thought she was going to be marrying Finn McCool's son, or Sheen, or even his grandson, Oscar, but actually Finn had his eye on her. And Granier put a spell on Diarmid that he must follow her and rescue her from marrying Finn McCool. And Diarmid wasn't able to say no. He was, like we say, spellbound by her. She was very beautiful. And they then left the palace, flee. But Diarmid has done a wrong thing. He's stolen the fiancée of the king, of the leader, the chief, his own chief. And this is a bit like the Lancelot and King Arthur legend. It's possibly one of the sources of that later Celtic story. And then Granier and Diarmid flee from Finn McCool, and there's a long poetic tradition come down, which is about how they escape each time. Just in the nick of time, they manage to climb a tree, or they escape into a cave. The telling of that story is a huge part of the Celtic tradition. And eventually, Finn finally pardons Diarmid after Angus Og, who's another god of love, intercedes on the couple's behalf. And they then live happily ever after. So it's a tragic story, but it has a happy ending. So, I mean, there's so many love stories at the moment on the planet that are in trouble. We have in Ukraine 3 or 4 million young women have had to flee the country, leaving their husbands, boyfriends behind, to fight an impossible war. They're outmanned, outgunned, and they're dying one by one. Russia has the firepower to kill them all, tragically and horrendously. Think how many tragic love stories are being deconstructed as we speak. Think about the tragic love stories of the people of Gaza. 33,000 people have just been killed in the last few months. Just ordinary women and children having their love stories utterly, rudely interrupted because of the wrong actions of a few tempestuous young men who thought, we'll join Hamas. It seems that what these Hamas people were doing was trying to break out of Gaza to go and capture hostages to then bring back as bargaining chips. The evidence I've seen, which is, I've gone into this substantially, is that a lot of the killings and so on that happened were actually by Israeli fire attacking, and all the claims about these Hamas people were doing torture and burning babies seem to be fake propaganda. There's no real evidence for any of that. But truth becomes, the casualty of war, as they say. So, but the point is that these love stories are being decimated. I would like, and the Russian troops that are going and fighting and killing in Ukraine, they're dying en masse as well. Putin has no care about sending them to slaughterhouses. He's just banking on more numbers will do it. Well, that is such a cruel and wrongful thing to be doing, in my opinion. But that's the way he's acting. So the challenge to us is, how can we make this have a happy ending? In the myth, it has a happy ending. But I would say to all the lovers out there, how can we collectively engineer that history has a happy ending? The distinction between tragedy and comedy, as Aristotle pointed out, and literary scholars, comedy has a happy ending. Shakespeare's plays, which are comedies, have a happy ending. They end with a wedding. They end with the lovers find each other. The tragedies end with bodies all over the stage, like King Lear or Hamlet. we're living through a tragic time in history. I want it to have a happy ending. And in fact, I've thought, as a literary scholar and a poet, it'd be good to set up a society for the study of happy endings. There isn't such a thing in literature. Films that are comedies have happy endings, romantic comedies. I think we should study what it is to have a happy ending and then try and organise for it. That's where the historian turns into the prophet, and actually sort of tries to shape reality. But, so that to me is what this card means. It's water, which represents also fluidity. We have to be fluid. And sometimes we get what we think we want. It's not quite what we want. We have to keep searching. That is life, isn't it? But if you keep going and you keep the faith, you eventually have a happy ending, is what I think the card says. Okay, now the next card is Dagda, the king of the earth, which is the strong deity at the heart of the Druid faith in Ireland. Dagda is who means the good God in Irish. He was the patron or host of all the great parties of Ireland. He had a cauldron that always produced food, no matter how many people came to his house, 10, 20, 30, 50, there's always enough in the cauldron. And that's why the card shows him with the cauldron. He had a huge club because he was a protector deity, so you don't want to interfere with him or, cause trouble. And he seems to be the origin of the Jolly Green Giant in popular mythology and legends and so on. His children included Angus, the god of love, who we've just seen sorting out Diarmaid's trouble. And this is an interesting thing, he had to marry the Morrigan, who was an indigenous goddess and who was the goddess of war, because he was one of the Tuatha De Danann, the incoming deities, and there were existing deities in Ireland when they arrived. And the Morrigan was a kind of intelligent goddess who, because Dagda seduced her and slept with her, she then gave her intelligence on the other deities and enabled them to win the battle. So the Dagda was quite sneaky, and he was able to use his intelligence to bring about victory. He was also the father of Bridget, who's the goddess of bards and druids, and gave her name to Saint Bridget of Ireland. We've just celebrated her feast day. So, he was a bit like the Zeus of Ireland, if you want, the most supreme sort of male patriarchal deity. The question of God's goodness is something that I've been researching recently. I like the fact that he's the good God, because I've been looking up in the 99 Names of God in the Islamic Sufi tradition. I've been working on Persian and the literary language of Persian and its literature, because Persian Zoroastrianism believed God had two sides, the good and the bad, Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. And Mani, the prophet of Persian, mysticism in the 2nd century, sort of took that to its ultimate conclusion. There's a good God, but there's also a devil. Whereas Plato in Greek thought there was just one ultimate source, which is good. In the Shaivite Kashmir tradition, we've seen there's one ultimate source, Shiva, who has ambivalence. He's also the god of destruction and death and transformation, but is ultimately good. And the creation itself is good. And I think the Druids realised that the goodness of the Creator is factual. Yes, there's trouble and there are teeth aches and heartaches and broken love stories and there's wars, but ultimately creation is good, which was what was affirmed in the Judeo-Christian tradition. which is why I think the Druids accepted Christ as a teacher coming from the Father, bringing that ultimate revelation of God's love and goodness. So, you know, in a sense, what later Irish Christian theologians said is Dagda paved the way for the advent of Christianity. And there is a tradition that at the court of Cormac Mac Airt in Ireland, the Druids saw the crucifixion clairvoyantly at a distance and said, a great, you know, sage has just been killed, which is an interesting story. I think that, you know, ontologically, when goodness is destroyed, killed, we all suffer, we all lose. And I think that's what that story is about. Whereas Dagda himself never committed, you know, crimes against other deities, and even to win a battle, all he did was sleep with the goddess, you know, because those battles among the gods were magical battles. The Battle of Moytura, you know, they are taking place in multi-dimensional realities, where no actual fighting's going on. It's all about mind play, like in that wonderful television film called Highlander, which re-invokes all that stuff. Because these stories were taken to Scotland, and when I lived in Scotland for 7 years, I studied the Druid Scottish traditions, and they're the same as the Irish, with a slight shift. So yes, so I think the teaching of this is that yes, there's trouble, there's broken hearts going on the planet. We're going through a really difficult time, but ultimately God's goodness will get us through. And one of the names of Allah in the Quran, in the Sufi tradition, is the giver of goodness, the creator of goodness. So Allah isn't just good, he's the creator of goodness. So he's constantly engineering for us possibilities of goodness in our lives. So just look out for them, and you know, when they come, plant them, you know, grow them for other people too, because goodness is something we should share. And finally, just etymologically, good is a really interesting name in Anglo-Saxon, and it's related to the word God. The word God and good come from the same etymological root, and that root is the same as the word to gather, or togetherness. And it means, the concept behind it is God is that which brings people together, or that creates gathering of people. And that is the source behind the idea of goodness and God. I don't know how that works in French. Dieu, ça c'est la lumière. La racine de cet mot, c'est la lumière divine. Mais bon, c'est quoi bonus au latin? Bon, I don't know the etymology of bonus, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, I can't help.
But I have ordered an etymological dictionary of Latin, which should be arriving here in the next week or two, and then I will be able to look up the etymology of the Latin phrase, which underlies the French bon. So I'll let you know. Yes. Okay, well look, may the force of goodness go with everyone, and may we all have a good week coming ahead. Okay? Any final comments or observations? No.
Thank you very much.
Okay, no, my pleasure. Thank you. Let's hope that the problems of the world get sorted gradually by what we're doing here and others like us.